Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. Well, again, a day kind of dominated by events in the United States. And again, to an extent, around Trump and his announcement that he wants a 50% tariff on copper entering the United States. We don't export a lot of copper. In fact, I don't think we export much that is mined here at all. There is, of course, the second-hand market in some ways, and we all know the problems that has caused for us. But I suppose the real story coming out of the States tonight is that Nvidia has gone to $4 trillion in valuation. And it really is astonishing, but it does also show how markets work. You have this sort of belief in the future, belief in artificial intelligence, belief in the idea that the future is going to be, that is going to be more valuable almost than it is now. Everyone wants a piece of Nvidia at the moment, despite some of the issues that it's had. And as a result of that, we see the valuation just going through the roof. All of that said, in the actual economy, everyone is talking about tariffs and what's really going to happen over the short term. And we keep coming back to the same thing. How do you deal with Trump, particularly when you don't know what he's going to do? If you read some of the international reporting on what he sort of said in other deals with other countries, some of it just doesn't make sense. And I am not sure what his officials are saying to our officials. We've had very little coming from our trade officials. I understand that. Very difficult to do this kind of thing in public. There are constituencies that need to sort of be traded off against each other. No one can do that in public, so it is quite tricky. So there is just a little bit of a lack of kind of light around it all. We'll hear more about it as we go through the program this evening, and looking forward to that. Also, how you can get ripped off online so many different ways. It does look now like the Financial Sector Conduct Authority is going to get a little bit more involved in that, and good. I just don't know if anyone can deal with the sheer wave of kind of, I say nonsense, what I actually mean is people trying to scam you. I just don't know if actually it is possible to deal with the wave that we're seeing of it. I don't know if you have someone in your team, someone you manage, someone you work with, and you look at them and you think to yourself, I don't know if this person will ever be productive in our team, just not pulling their weight. Well, we'll speak to someone about an hour from now, how to deal with that person. There may still be ways before you write them off, before you go through the long, drawn-out, difficult process of sort of removing them from your company and the impact it has on you and the impact it has on them. There may just be some ways around that, ways that you can actually redeem them, rehabilitate them. That coming up on The Money Show in an hour from now. You might have been in an experience where you've done that. Be good to hear it from you. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority telling Bloomberg it's going to be spending a lot more money dealing with the massive number of new online financial scams. You know how many nonsense adverts you see? I mean, promising you the world. If you give someone just a little bit of your money, you will suddenly be richer than Elon Musk. You know the kind of thing. Cracking down on this, though. Very, very tricky. Karel de Jager is the CEO of Sixpence, a blockchain software company. Karel, good evening to you. The authority says they'll spend, I think, around 200 million rand over the next year and a half. Is that going to be enough? I mean, some of these scams, whatever they are, wherever they come from, seem to be incredibly well funded.
Yeah, Stephen, this is a much-needed move from the regulator. I'm very glad to see that they are stepping in this direction. Whether it's enough or not, we'll see. But I mean, these scams, as you say, they've become incredibly sophisticated. I mean, AI is now a new tool available to fraudsters around the world. We've gotten used to some of the previous technologies that they've used. Of course, we know with every new technology, there's always going to be good and evil being used for it. So we've gotten used to some of the previous things. You know, we've learned how to navigate the internet. We know how a suspicious link looks, and we know that sometimes we'll see some of these things online and it'll have bad grammar and language, and we kind of have a feel that it's off. But now with AI, all of that changes. So fraudsters can write perfect grammar in English, and they can even use video and pictures, which in historically we've usually gotten used to regarding that as the truth. But now, of course, that's definitely also in doubt.
I mean, there was a time, call it about 15 years, Karel, I don't know if you'll remember, when it seemed every second email I got was a kind of financial scam of some kind. And I thought this would just be the rest of my life. This is how it was going to be. And then, I don't know where, I don't know how, I don't know if it was that the spam part of my email section got better. I think there was a big international effort to stop it. If I remember reading somewhere 40% of those emails came from just 2 PCs. I mean, it's an extraordinary story. And they suddenly stopped. There was a breakthrough somehow. Is there any chance of a similar kind of breakthrough here?
Yes, there definitely is, although it's not 100% clear exactly what it's going to look like. But I think a lot of it also has to do with our habits. How do we as internet users navigate the World Wide Web? You know, in the past, I know exactly which emails you are referring to. We all got excited when we got that first email where you may have inherited a large sum of money from some forgotten uncle. But, you know, very quickly we learned that you shouldn't click on those kind of links. And that was just embedded in our habits and how we actually surf the web. So I think that there's definitely an aspect of that, is that we're going to have to change our habits again and to realize that nothing which you even see, there's no videos, there's no language or text, there's no photos, nothing that you see on the internet can just be regarded as the truth on face value. So we're going to have to change our habits, but there's definitely a technological side of it as well. In cybersecurity theory, we learn that that our strategy should be prevention, detection, and reaction. And we're seeing the regulators stepping up in a big way here now, allocating funding towards all of these three things, like preventing it, detecting it when it happens, and then reacting very, very, very quickly in order to protect the public. So I'm glad that they're stepping up and joining the fight with us.
Finding the people responsible, and I kind of dread asking this question because I know they're out of the country and almost impossible to catch.
Yeah, but I think that that is definitely one thing. But I think there's also a huge amount of intelligence to be gained from these things. You know, a lot of it requires platforms that harvest this type of intelligence. A lot of it requires cryptocurrency. We for example, we build intelligence platforms where we can track and identify fraudulent transactions using crypto. And then, so I think that if you do have the right tools in your toolbox as the regulator, and as any public protector in that matter, law enforcement and so on included, if you do have the right tools in your toolbox, I think it can go a long way. I think our regulators historically have always been slow to react. So it's good to see them stepping up and actually admitting that they require this, that funding needs to go towards fighting this. So I hope that the outcome will actually be positive for all of us.
It seems that this kind of online scam has actually grown more quickly in South Africa than in other places. And I can imagine some of the reasons why that might be. We have a lot of people online, a lot of people absolutely desperate for more money because of the poverty that we face. Is that one of the reasons? Is that why we're seeing, is it happening more here than in other places?
Yes, it's definitely targeted at vulnerable people. I think it's not only geographical demographics. I think it's also age groups. So especially elder people, I think that they are a lot more vulnerable for these types of things. Unfortunately, maybe it's also because of the generational upbringing, and how social media and the internet in general is used. So in South Africa, I have no doubt about it. If we look at some statistics, it seems like online crime in South Africa has grown by more than 50% over the last year. So it's a massive upward and trajectory into the wrong way, and the amount is also staggering. It's in the singular billions of rands that's being lost every year due to this, and unfortunately, it is usually the people that can afford to lose the least amount of money that are the victims of these.
Karel de Jager, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. CEO of the blockchain software company Sixpence.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, different people in different industries still obviously trying to assess what the potential impact of what we think will now be a tariff of 30% from the US will be on their sector. You know, of course, what the US President Donald Trump said earlier in the week. Andrew Ballman is the CEO for corporate and corporate and advisory at Deal Leaders International. Andrew, good evening. I would imagine that no American company is going to propose any deal at all in South Africa just as a direct result of these tariffs.
Good evening, Stephen. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's just almost put a red cross over the southern tip of Africa as an investment target. And, you know, it was hard enough before this, and clearly now there's another shot across the bow that's this time I think hit the bow that we're going to have to deal with in the world of M&A.
It's not just us, though. I mean, yes, us, but there's a red cross of 25% over Japan for American companies. What I'm trying to get to is this money does need to go somewhere if American companies want to expand out of America, or maybe Trump doesn't want them to.
Yeah, look, agreed. I think it'll be interesting to see how, this capital gets redeployed into other geographies, because I think equally there are challenges in most territories in the world currently, and I think it's going to depend, I think, probably on the industries. So when I say the American investor potentially won't be looking at this part of the world, I guess it's going to depend on whether those targets supply back to America or not, and whether there's diversification strategies in place. But yeah, there is going to be a reset. We saw it earlier in the year when there was obviously this yo-yo effect of what was happening with the tariffs. A lot of European investors and acquirers, we picked up a lot more interest in our part of the world, because traditionally they would have potentially looked at investing in the US and other territories opened up. So yeah, very interesting dynamic, very fluid dynamic, and the next couple of months are going to be telling.
Isn't the real problem, and this is something that Donald Mackay said so early on, the real kind of danger, the real villain here is the uncertainty. Trump may do nothing. I mean, I have no idea what he's going to do, frankly, at this point. And we're now in a situation where just the uncertainty is everyone's just going to put those plans on hold for the next 3 years.
Look, definitely. Look, I think the one thing we can say is so as long as we can remember the last couple of years, there's been some form of uncertainty underpinning something. So I think from that perspective, yes, I think things could get put on hold. But again, I think there will be a knock-on effect to, we look at a lot of our clients in South Africa that have growth opportunities in the US. Now they're going to need to go, get back to the drawing board and see what they can do. But yeah, the indecisiveness is very difficult and the uncertainty is very difficult, because in the absence of knowing what the real risk is, you can't price for the real risk in your valuations. So, yeah, look, I suppose the trade-off will be, investment and growth has to happen through acquisition as well. So, hopefully it isn't a 3-year, respite of activity, but we'll see how that trickles through to, in the next couple of months.
Andrew Ballman, thanks very much indeed, CEO of Corporate and Advisory at Deal Leaders International. George Sibulelo is the president of the African United Business Confederation. George, good evening. Do appreciate the time. How are you and your members expecting to be affected by this 30% tariff if it does come in?
Stephen, it's great to hear your voice again, and thank you for the invitation. This is really a serious concern from our members. We already know that the 30% effect of this tariff would definitely have a direct impact on the South African goods, very significantly, because the products might be perceived to be much more expensive than any other goods within the U.S. market. Secondly, obviously anticipate that the demand is going to decrease, which obviously, as I say, would obviously change companies and consumers to look at alternative goods. And you know that NAMSA being one of the SAUBC patrons, is that the automotive industry would be highly impacted, including the components of the automotive industry. We also anticipate that the steel industry is going to be directly impacted. And as you know, South Africa is a minerals country, and we export quite a lot of minerals in the U.S. So we're going to see less demand of the manganese, aluminium. Issues of finance, the trade balance pressure, would also coming to the fore, where we're going to see the depreciation of the rand, which would obviously lead investors to decide to look at different countries for investment purposes. So the number of the FDI, foreign direct investment that would be coming into the country might also go lower. That will result in a number of jobs in this country because those companies will decide now to offload employees. And that's where the concern comes in.
George, I mean, how should our government respond to this? Do we get aggressive? Do we roll over? What do you think we should do?
There's a multiple of different options. One is we call upon the government, as they had already started, to accelerate these discussions, because what the U.S. president is doing is he's a deal maker. He's just doing deals. But I think what he misses is that South Africa it's a very emerging country. It needs to be supported. It has always been fragile because of the history of South Africa. I think he has to take that into consideration. The second thing that I see, which is very critical, Stephen, is that we now have to begin to look at alternative markets for South Africa, which really the African Continental Free Trade Agreement afford. And we need to accelerate and influence the African Union to ensure that this program is taken very seriously, because if we experience this kind of treatment, it's really unfair to the emerging markets such as African countries. And lastly, I do believe that we have various other markets such as the Chinese and the European Union market. So we need to really look at alternative markets.
George, Trump has said that he might impose another 10% tariff because we belong to the BRICS group. Should we change our foreign policy? Should we stay in BRICS, or should we leave BRICS because of what Trump is doing? Remember,
the primary purpose of what Trump is doing as a deal maker, and I want to talk about deal making because generally when you talk about presidents, it's a combination of a number of things, including the social norm. So therefore, for him to say another 30% for the BRICS members is because he really wants to develop his own domestic industrial development. And the problem is he realizes that this BRICS is becoming much more powerful. And therefore, as I said, it is absolutely unfair unless those countries decide to say, let's trade among ourselves and begin to build our capacity independent of U.S., which is really not going to happen overnight. But the reality is that should be the strategy of saying we will look at alternative markets among ourselves, because as BRICS members, we are now beginning to have the bigger share of the world economy.
George Sibulela, thanks very much indeed, President of the African United Business Confederation.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Greg Katzenehlenbogen is Director at Sanlam Private Wealth. Greg, good evening to you. In a way, a red letter day for NVIDIA, $4 trillion in valuation.
Yeah, that's quite a few rands if you convert it, Stephen. The NVIDIA, this artificial intelligence bandwagon just continues. It's like a steam train. So first company ever to reach $4 trillion market cap, and basically been driven by the fact that the holy grail of chips is really the chips that NVIDIA produce. Everyone wants them. They spend absolute fortune. Every quarter, you just see that their earnings are stratospheric. And recently now, NVIDIA unveiled a whole lot of new chips. So NVIDIA are talking about, as the world changes, they think that we will land up with eventually 1 billion humanoid robots doing things, 10 million automated factories, and 1.5 billion self-driving vehicles, and they want to be at the forefront of that with their chips driving that. So the demand for those chips is extremely strong, and it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. I saw today that China are looking to build 70 new energy data centers, and they're looking to acquire about 150,000 NVIDIA chips. I'm not sure how they're going to get it, because I think those are on that export prohibition list. But you can see that there's no other game in town for the very high end chip than NVIDIA. So I'm not surprised that it's reached this level, and who's to know where this will stop before it unwinds.
The copper market up very strongly. Trump threatening a 50% tariff on copper.
Yes, so he has been, but it's one of those. This copper story is one that I think that they might have to back down somewhat, because America doesn't have first of all, the number of copper mines to produce the volumes required. Secondly, they don't have the smelting capacity. And, of course, 90% of American copper into America is imported, and primarily from Chile. So, and in the run-up to this, you've had the situation where the price of copper in New York has traded much higher than in Europe, because people have been fearing that there would be some sort of tariff, and have been sending massive amounts of copper to the US to try and beat these tariffs. So they're well supplied at the moment, but I think, they're trying to they want to be self-sufficient in many things, but I think in copper they'll have to back down somewhat, because it's impossible for the amounts. Once they've used up these stockpiles, they'll have to give some, allow countries and lower that tariff increase. But it's like, he shoots from the hip, and the first thing that comes into mind, 50%. At the end of the day, you might land up with 10 or 15%.
Greg, I don't know if you had a chance to find out what's happening with Italtal. Their shares were up nearly 5% on the day. I couldn't see any reason for it myself.
There was absolutely nothing today to indicate it. I did a little digging on Italtal. So next month they will declare their results. And if you go back, 2018, 2019, 2021 and 2024, they paid special dividends. Now, if you look just at last year, if you take the interim and the final dividend and add the special dividend, they were on a yield of about 12%. Now, that's almost like a bond yield. So I think that people are anticipating. They've also been going over the last 5 years, they've been spending $4 billion in an investment cycle to expand their manufacturing capacity and their retail footprint. I think that money is now done, it's spent, and now they will start to accumulate a lot more cash. So I think people are expecting dividends. I also saw that in the last quarter, a couple of funds from the Allan Gray stable were buyers of the stock. So I think it's really in anticipation of the results coming next that traders think that the results will be good, and there should be a nice special dividend.
Greg, thanks very much indeed. Greg Katzenehlenburg, and Director at Sanlam Private Wealth. That Italtal story has been bothering me for a while. Now I think I understand it. Just after 6:30.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Of course, that's the number to dial. Lots of wailing and gnashing of teeth over the tariff announcements from the White House this week. Plenty of economic theory on why it's such a bad idea. Our government, though, still has to deal with the problem, well, as it is. shouting and screaming is not going to help. It does mean that someone, somewhere, I presume sitting in Tshwane, has to craft a response to the White House. Peter Attard Montalto is Managing Director at Krutham. Peter, good evening. For the moment, in public, at least in South Africa, our DTIC officials have been relatively quiet. What do we know about what they've actually been trying to do to draft a response?
Good evening, Stephen. Well, I think the core problem here is that there is a huge amount of asymmetry in spin, if we want to put it in those terms. USTR, other parts of the US administration are saying absolutely nothing about South Africa and haven't done since the Oval Office meeting, whilst DIRCO and others are, I think, putting out a lot of basically wrong expectation management about how close we are to a deal. I mean, fundamentally, the list, for instance, on agriculture has been unchanged between the two countries of issues for at least 10 years, if not longer. The USTR has put out a lot of very specific reports on the non-tariff trade barriers around services for many years, as well as on a lot of other goods. So, I mean, the playing field is entirely known, and I think, ultimately the letter that was received the other day is an indication that a trade deal fundamentally is not close. And our understanding from speaking to both sides is that there is still a huge gap that needs fundamentally a decision, if you bridge it or not. South, of course, doesn't have to bridge it if it wants to sort of go it alone, but there are clearly economic consequences from doing that.
I mean, this then gets to the question of what should our negotiators be doing? What should our stance be? And this conversation is happening in Tokyo, in Indonesia. It's happening in many places tonight. And at the heart of it is I suppose, the same conundrum. Do we think Trump really wants a deal, or does he want something else?
Well, I think ultimately he wants deals, right? And he is using this and the force of this to try and get people to more closely align with what the US wants. That's why EU and India and places that didn't fundamentally have as wide a gap are much closer to the deal and are expected to do a deal soon. But the US, remember, is pointing out many asymmetries as well in what South Africa offers. There's a vast gap, for instance, between exceptionally low tariffs on chicken, for instance, from the EU versus very high tariffs on chicken that South Africa imports from the US. The US calls out why that gap is so large. And I think there's a whole much wider set of issues, obviously, that we've discussed before around foreign policy, around the ICJ, all those sorts of things. I don't think they're fully to bear on this. I think the USTR is very much around the trade issues. They're very much around the tariff and non-tariff trade barriers. And that's fundamentally what this is about. I think there's a final stage potentially to a deal around some of those foreign policy aspects. But at the moment, just on the pure trade issues, the two sides are much, much further apart than one would guess reading the media.
Does our DTIC actually have the capacity to deal with all of this? There are lots of trade-offs that need to be made, lots of negotiations that need to happen, positions that need to be adopted. They probably require negotiation with various constituencies, etc. And on top of all of that, we have a minister who's got quite a busy plate right now for other reasons.
Well, I think in general, DIRCO has dropped the ball continually in recent years over economic diplomacy. I think there is a key question here around their capacities to do economic diplomacy. In general, there is, I think, exceptional weakness in the people that DTIC deploys in many countries around the world, for instance, which is not great in terms of economic intelligence as well. The feedback that we've talked to a large number of different diplomats and trade experts, is that there is a weakness in DTIC on this sort of thing. You often see countries hiring global experts in trade negotiations to take on a challenge like this. But as I said, I don't think it's exactly that hard. The issues are known. USTR publishes a report every year. The most recent one was put out, I think it was 3 months ago or so. It says in there exactly what the US has issues with. I don't think ultimately this is rocket science on the trade side.
One of the funny things around all of this is that we keep, and I'm in the media myself, but we keep expecting that from this point we will kind of know. And each time it kind of gets pushed out for various reasons. That is the nature of negotiating a trade deal. I get that. But what I'm trying to get to is I don't know if we'll even get a proper trade deal in the current Trump term. It seems to be taking so long at this point.
Well, I mean, I think it fundamentally requires South Africa to make further movement if they do want there to be a deal. I mean, our understanding of the situation is that after the meeting, rather before the Oval Office meeting, did not see the deal that's on the table very well received at all, or subsequent iterations of it. I think the other point to mention, though, I think where people need to introspect quite a lot is that a lot of what South African notion is put out in the media doesn't make any sense. For instance, the idea that South Africa will buy US gas is a complete non-starter in terms of being able to import it, first of all, having the technology set up and the infrastructure set up to import it is highly questionable, and I think the US knows this full well. The same with offering the US exploration rights over critical minerals. Actually, there are not that many mines of interest to the US, I believe, in South Africa, and this is not some sort of panacea to get a trade deal offering these sorts of things. The US has done a lot of mapping on these sorts of issues. It knows where these assets are in Africa, and I don't believe they think they are in South Africa. It's the same in terms of oil and gas exploration in South Africa. US firms have huge experience dealing with South Africa in the last 20 years on this kind of thing, and don't see a decent doing business environment. So yes, I mean, all these things together, I think, we need to take a lot of what's going out of the South African government with quite a hefty pinch of salt.
Sure. What that would mean then is that we have very few levers with which to kind of negotiate. We actually, on your view, seem to be in quite a weak position.
Well, yes, South Africa is a small, open economy. I think there is certainly a case to be made that a lot of goods, particularly things like citrus, can well be sold into other markets relatively easily, particularly into Asia. Cars much harder to do so. So ultimately, I think a more diversified trade strategy, and if you like, the mitigation of what's going on here is probably going to be where we need to have more focus than necessarily trying to find a deal.
Peter Attard Montalto, thanks so much. Managing Director at Krutham.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
The Money Show is in conversation with Momentum, discussing why context matters in financial advice. Well, you know, of course, how important your actual position matters when it comes to discussing matters around money and where you are. Franzo Friedrich is the Chief Marketing Officer at Momentum Investments. Franzo, good evening. Your line at the moment, advice meets your context. I mean, that suggests where you are, your context, where you are in life, how much more time you have to invest, how much more time you are going to need to spend money, how much you're earning. All of those things really matter. Why is context in terms of financial advice so important?
Good evening, Stephen. Yeah, everyone's financial journey is personal. And each person's circumstances, their needs, their dreams and goals are different to any other person. And for Momentum, financial advice is really the center of our universe. And we believe that accredited financial advisors really help clients identify and quantify their needs. They do that through helping clients build a budget, they make informed decisions, and they plan for various financial goals, short, medium, and long term. And savings and investments are key components in any sound financial plan. So it's possible to save for everything from short-term needs, like plugging an emergency gap, to medium-term needs like buying a car or having enough money for a house deposit. I was at Loftus this past weekend, and with the Springbok test match prices like they are today, you almost need to start a savings plan just to take your family to a game. There are also long-term needs like contributing to university fees for your children so they don't enter the world burdened with debt. I was incredibly fortunate that my parents paid for my studies, and I'll always be grateful for that. It enabled me to start accumulating assets at a relatively young age. The most important thing, though, the long-term thing to save for, is of course retirement. And it's sad that so few people can retire and maintain their standard of living. Many people then have to make difficult choices like moving in with family or even stopping medical aid contributions, which is really the last thing older people can really afford to do. A lot of people that start careers have the opportunity to contribute towards a pension or provident fund, and it's really a great way to get going on your savings journey. And those funds are usually central to the financial advice process when advisors are constructing financial plans with clients. Many people nowadays also use tax-free investment products or accounts, which are a wonderful way to accumulate additional savings, and contributions of up to 36,000 Rand a year and R500,000 over a lifetime can be invested this way, and they grow tax-free with compound growth, which is where the real magic is. They don't call compound growth the newest wonder of the world for nothing.
Yeah.
Another popular option is to invest within a retirement annuity. It's also a very tax-efficient way to save and invest. And since you can claim back up to 27.5% of your contributions from tax every year, your money is also growing tax-free. So at Momentum, we offer all these options. We believe in financial advice, and we believe that financial advisors help people invest their savings wisely and achieve their goals. We also have other things like guaranteed investments over a certain period, and also things like unit trusts and annuities. That's all, things that advisors use in the financial planning process. So whether you're 18 or 80, we have something for you.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot around context. You've got to really think about where you are. I mean, there's some obvious things, right? Some obvious tips. I mean, you've got to make sure that you don't waste money for a start. You've got to make sure that you spend it quite wisely. You've got to make sure that whatever it is you're spending it on is something you actually need, not just something you actually want, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important tips and the most important things is just to get started. Our CEO, Jeanette Marais, always says that the best time to start saving is yesterday, and the second best time is today. So the first step is just to look through your bank statements. It's amazing how you can spot those old debit orders that you've forgotten about that just rolls on and on and on. When I did this, I found I was still paying the driving range down the road for my son's golfing lessons, and he stopped doing that a couple of years ago already. So it's possible to find the money. The second thing is to draft a budget with the help of your financial advisor. That's really the cornerstone of financial planning. And by doing that, it's a lot easier to identify those bad spending habits, like ordering too much takeaways, too frequent trips to the mall, or buying things that feels good in the moment, but doesn't do much for you in the long run. So rather than popping into the shops every other day, do your grocery shopping on a weekly basis with a planned list. Using the delivery apps that we have nowadays also prevents you from those impulsive buys, as you only order those things you really need. Another useful tool is to use your rewards program effectively, so as they can really help you stretch your rands a lot. Some of these programs are designed to be very beneficial if you simply change your behavior in a way that benefits you as well as the product provider. So make sure you understand your rewards programs, where it makes sense. Why not change your behavior in order to get the maximum value out of something that you're paying for anyway?
And then, very quickly, Franzo, some of the triggers that you need to be thinking about to make sure your advice is sort of keeping up. Check every year, understand what you're actually doing, things like that.
Absolutely. And as people go through different phases and stages in their lives, new dreams and goals come to the fore. When you get married, have children, you get divorced, want to immigrate, have to care for your parents, are nearing retirement, or just change jobs, all of these things have a significant impact on your financial plan that require the help of a respected financial advisor to guide you through the changes. From an investments perspective, we also believe that financial advisors play a key role in managing their clients' emotions and investing behavior. A key ingredient in investment success is the ability to remain calm when others are panicking, to remain invested when others are disinvesting or moving their money to safer asset classes, only to reinvest when it's too late, and then they destroy value in the process. It's very easy to have a knee-jerk reaction when markets go down, but that usually results in real losses for clients over the long run. This is where financial advisors play a critical role in helping their clients make the right investment decisions.
Franzo, thanks very much indeed. Franzo Friedrich is the Chief Marketing Officer for Momentum Investments. From a long life ahead to a long life lived. No matter where you are in life, you're the perfect age for any of Momentum's savings, investment and retirement solutions. For savings that meets your unique context, contact a Momentum accredited financial advisor today. Momentum, your journey to success. Momentum is part of Momentum Group Limited, an authorized financial services and credit provider.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening, I'm Stephen Grootes. Well, plenty to come in the next little while. I don't know if you've had someone in your office who you thought isn't really shaping up, and you don't know if they ever will. We'll have a guy give you a guide on how to deal with that, and how to deal with that in a very positive way, actually. It's not just sort of get rid of them, here's how to get around the Labour Relations Act, actually in a completely different way. I went through this thing a couple of months ago where I got a phone call from my cell phone company, and I'll tell you what I do. I have a SIM card in my cell phone, which I have one of the big names, which I've had for years and years and years, one of the big networks. And then in my iPad, I have one of the other big networks, and that's a data SIM. And I've always done that deliberately as a sort of reporter. You always have this nightmare of being in an area where only one of them has coverage. That's sort of the reason that I did it like that. And I found that data SIMs now are very, very cheap. It costs, a couple of $100, and you get data that I think even a teenager wouldn't be able to finish. Well, I say that, maybe. And what happens when the contract expires? Well, Wendy Knowler has come up with the most bizarre and actually quite scary story about what happened to someone. So something just to sort of, be aware of, that it can happen to you and it could cost you quite a lot of money if you're actually not particularly ready for it. And then don't forget, from 7:30, really looking forward to the conversation actually, Johan Kotze, he's the CEO at AgriSA. You've heard him a couple of times on The Money Show. And we'll find out what makes him tick this evening and just talk about really his relationship with agriculture. I've always found when you talk to people in the agriculture sector, even if they're not farmers, the passion starts to really shine through. Looking forward to that.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
Business Unusual is brought to you by Business Outsurance. Visit outsurance.co.za to switch and save today. So look, this hasn't happened to me for a while, but there have been times when I've looked at someone I've been working with and I've thought to myself, I don't know if this person can really actually be changed to become productive in the team I'm in. When you look at someone in your office and you think, actually, this person's not adding value, what do you do when that happens? Sipiwe Moyo is an organizational behavior specialist. Sipiwe, good evening. In a way, it's easy to look at that person and just kind of write them off or lose interest in them. You suggest, actually, we need to look at something completely different in trying to get them going, trying to make them a valuable member of the team.
Yeah, Stephen, good evening. I think there's a lot of people with hidden potential that they need someone to just believe in them. And I think, once you've written people off and say this person is unmotivated, they are not skilled, I think that is not very, very helpful. And of course, we need to get to a point where people must be accountable for performance. But I think before you do that, I want to suggest that there's a few things that I would like you to do. There's a beautiful theory that has been well researched in organizational psychology called the self-determination theory. So it just says that all human beings, basically, no matter what the job title, no matter what the age or culture, we're driven universally by three things. Firstly, I want to feel that I'm capable at something, and generally we are so motivated when we feel competent. Every person, you see people in the gym, Stephen, when you are in a spinning class or another cardio class, the more competent you are, the more excited you are in that class, and the more you move into the front. And the second one is autonomy, to the extent that I have some control over what I do, and that autonomy is very helpful in terms of motivation. So you can tell people what they need to do, but sometimes you have to give them a little bit of a how. And lastly, the concept of relatedness. I feel connected to others. All of us want to go to a place where people call you by name, people you want to feel seen, and people start knowing you. They call you from the front. They acknowledge what you've done. So to an extent that you've taken care of these three things, I would suggest that it don't be too quick to write people off.
How do you go about then? Sometimes I've found trying to kind of reach the person. You can see someone's having a bad time and they usually know they're not being valuable, right? It's very rare you come across someone who thinks they're adding immense value and isn't. Sometimes people do, I suppose. But how do you reach the person? Because to try and have that conversation, face to face, I don't think you're doing very well. That's not really going to help. How do you do it? How do you draw them into the team is really what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, first of all, we've got to normalize having conversations. So you don't want to be having conversations the first time with someone about the fact that they're not doing well. So the idea of checking in with people on a regular basis, and it's very, very important. And so if you have some kind of a check-in time with someone where you're taking off a few ideas, you're talking to them about what they're feeling, you start getting a sense that people will tell you. And especially if you depersonalize that kind of feedback and you say, how do you feel about a particular task? So So when you give people feedback, for example, if you give them specific feedback and you say, you are doing well on this, I think you could still improve on this. Would you like me to put something together for you to improve on this? Is there any help you need on this? So when that feedback feels a little bit depersonalized and we've normalized having conversations, it's better. And I always think the problem is that we generally don't normalize feedback. By the time you speak to somebody, you've been thinking about their incompetence for a very long time. You're angry. And by the time you speak to them, the feedback is quite brutal. Or as other people say, it's robust. I don't think we should talk about tough conversation or robust conversation. We should just have normal, honest conversation and just that reframe that says honesty is actually very kind. As you are saying, that person is already feeling a lot of displeasure in the fact that they're not competent and they're not pulling their weight. So just having that honest conversation with them would be so helpful. It will be such a relief to them as well if it's framed correctly.
Sometimes people are just unengaged, so you can engage them, but sometimes there'll be a little bit of resistance. Maybe the person comes from a very different background to you. Maybe they come from a very different background to everybody that's in the office. I mean, those can put some obstacles up. They can. I think some people are a bit nervous about dealing with situations like that.
They are, especially when one of the things that we've spoken about a lot in HR space is on how we can separate performance conversations from development conversations. So particularly if people think that the development conversation will affect their performance conversations and therefore their increase and therefore their bonus or eventually the fact that they could be let go. But if you have development conversations separately and you people start understanding that you want the best from them and you increase the relatedness part. Remember, when people feel like I belong, when people feel like my mistakes are not punished to a point where I feel like I could lose my job. So if you just normalize those emotional check-ins, how are you doing really? And you use certain rituals, rituals of connection. You build connection. And as you say, once people feel they're in the in crowd, they belong, then they are more likely to admit even when they're not doing well. It's when somebody feels like an outsider in an organization that they will hide their mistakes, that they will hide their incompetence, that they will hide the fact that they would love to improve. So it's a matter of feeling safe that I actually do belong here. And once I do that, the conversation around developing me is much easier.
Sometimes, I sometimes think leaders need to look a little bit for opportunity. So you don't actually need to, yes, I think have the meetings. I think that's a great idea. Make them routine, make them kind of obviously routine, make them for everyone. But sometimes if you can think someone's having a bad time, look for a moment to maybe stand up for them or to defend them in public or something. I sort of think of journalism examples. You just need to do that once actually for someone to feel very valued. And it's about looking for the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, look for those opportunities. We call them coaching moments. And those coaching moments where you stand up for somebody, you ask for their opinion, and people really want to feel like they're also helping you. So every now and then, ask for help from them as well. And you give them input as early as possible in an informal way sometimes. And stop hovering around to a point where you're now micromanaging them to a point where they feel so nervous about work. So I agree that flexible pathways, ask a different scenario, coffee here, informal chats here. And that's why, Stephen, most people will still advocate for in-person times where people can see your tone, they can see that you're not fighting. That's why sometimes it is just better to be in the office as well.
I've seen situations where it's happened to people I've known, it's happened in a sort of professional environment, where someone hasn't really fired, right? And you can see they've had a rough time. And they can then go to another office that's doing exactly the same thing and really fire. It can happen the other way too, but really suddenly have a very good time. And you can see them doing the same thing. The two offices do a very similar thing and suddenly fire. Does that suggest that there's been a failure of a leader to spot those moments? I mean, sometimes, I do think sometimes, as much as we want to depersonalize things, sometimes some people are just not a good fit for a team or are a better fit for another team. Maybe, let me put it like that. But, those examples...
absolutely.
Yeah, go on.
No, absolutely, Stephen. I think, sorry to disturb you, the context really does matter. I mean, even I've seen a situation where I was in one part of the bank I was working at where I was struggling, and I go to another different part of the bank and I'm suddenly flourishing, winning those coveted employee of the month and so on. And it's about being seen. It's about not feeling too nervous all the time. It's about the leader's belief in you as well. And sometimes, and there's a beautiful studies that have shown this, that people are going to rise or descend to the level of your expectation. So when you expect good from people, when you trust that they will do well, and you expect the best, they normally rise to the occasion. But a context where I'm feeling nervous all the time, I feel like someone is going to, I feel like an imposter all the time, and I feel like I cannot perform to the best of my ability. I can, in that particular context, I can be almost useless, and you take me to a different context and all of a sudden I shine. And when that happens, we have to talk about fit. We have to talk about the culture that I've created as a leader. We have to also talk about the fact that, have I thought about someone's competence? Have I improved our relationship? And have I given them the flexibility to with style, with time, with location, in order for them to perform to the best of their abilities?
You see it with football players, don't you? Probably the best example. They change clubs and suddenly they become a superstar. And it really is the best example I can think of. Sipiwe Moyo, thanks so much. Organizational behavior specialist. Have you heard? Business Outsurance are experts in business insurance for pharmacies, restaurants, beauty salons, convenience stores, and more. That's why over 100,000 businesses across various industries trust Business Outsurance. A big benefit of Business Outsurance is that when you claim, your excess is a fixed amount, not a percentage of the claim. Get a quick and easy quote today. Call 08 600 60,000 or visit outsurance.co.za. Licensed insurer and FSB, TCs and information online.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Well, I don't know how often you check the fine print in cell phone contracts. They're a little bit of a joke in a way, because I don't know if I've ever met anyone who actually does. But one of the things that might happen is what happens when you actually cancel a cell phone contract. And you would think that should be the easiest thing in the world, particularly when it actually runs out by itself. In other words, it simply expires. It's finished. Geniet, done. Well, it seems sometimes something else happens. Wendy Knowler, your consumer ninja, joins us now. Wendy, good evening. You have an astonishing story about what happened when somebody's contract came to an end and the bill they received after that.
Okay, so there are two issues. You mentioned cancelling, and that's one of the big problems, because many people don't realise that the contracts don't actually automatically cancel. Rather, you have to still give 30 days, i.e. a month's notice, for that to actually happen. But I'm talking about the scenario where people decide that they're not going to cancel and they're not going to renew either. They're just going to let the contract carry on a month-to-month basis. So they're getting the same deal, very similar in most cases historically, and then they don't have the commitment, the strings. They can cancel at any time with 30 days notice and no penalties, right? So that's the benefit of that. But what's happening is that people are finding, sometimes many months later, they think they're still paying the same amount by debit order every month. And then they found out, as Feroza of Durban did, that actually the monthly subscription had gone up, in her case, fivefold. I think, if my maths is correct, from 169 Rand a month to around 600 Rand a month.
Sure.
Right. And the point is, she didn't know. She got no notification whatsoever.
So, I mean, okay, so you're paying 169 Rand a month. This is probably a data SIM. They are relatively cheap now.
Data.
The contract ends, and then suddenly it goes up to 600 Rand. Now, there can't be any economic or financial justification for that. Was she told?
No, there's a justification, as they say, well, they have these very promotional discount offers, and when the contract period to which that applies ends, then the contract, if it rolls over month to month, will revert to so-called standard rates. obviously this is a strong arm tactic to get people to now commit to another 2-year contract, because that's what the networks want. They want this commitment because that works financially for them. But in terms of this case, in Feroza's case, she didn't get any notification. And the point is that the Consumer Protection Act compels companies which offer fixed-term contracts, such as cell phone contracts and gym contracts, to contact them. It's very specific, within 40 to 80 days before the end of that contract period, and spell out the options and the implications of each one. So the idea being, if you want to cancel, you must do it with, give us 30 days notice. If it's going to roll over, this is what's going to happen. It's going to go up to 600 Rand a month. And if you want to renew, here are the options. Well, predictably, the cell phone industry is very good at the marketing of their new offers, but not so great on the detail of, the other options. And in this case, and this is where it got really interesting, MTN said they did notify Feroza, and bearing in mind this is a data-only contract, but they sent her an SMS, which they say, in their words, she was unable to access, right? So in other words, she didn't actually get any notification, and hence the huge bill shock. Yeah.
I mean, I do that with a provider. I have a SIM card and an iPad for data, and I actually wouldn't have the first clue of how to access the SMSs. I don't.
No,
I mean, I presume it receives them. I can't imagine why you would use it. Astonishing.
Exactly, and I think the point for me is that this must happen in many, many, many cases. So when I took up the case with MTN, they put things right by crediting the amount of quite substantial 4,500 Rand to Feroza's account, being the difference between her so-called promotional 169 a month and that 600 Rand a month, which she'd been charged for months before she realized it. And they've said, we acknowledge this gap in communication and sincerely regret the inconvenience caused. We've engaged with Feroza to explain that whatever. But, as we say, it's it can't be a lone case.
Do we know how many other MTN data contracts had the same awful surprise?
Yeah, well, we'd love to know that, wouldn't we? But it's not the sort of information that gets shared with the media. They did say that notification processes for data-only subscribers were being reviewed, as I said, to improve transparency, and that this is a global thing that happens. These promotional low subscription fees, and then they jump up, and they call it promo drop-off. But I don't know how many people that actually are paying for these contracts know that term and the implication of it. And that's why we want to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the issues around transparency, right? And this is, back to the fine print in the contract. Yes, it's there. Yes, you should be able to understand it's actually in real terms not very transparent. What's the industry's track record on this kind of thing?
Well, not good, I have to say. When my own Vodacom contract was coming to an end about 8 months ago, I did get an SMS from the network about that, but it was really shockingly vague. It said, your contract will soon come to an end. Any discounts will fall away. But they didn't give me any detail on that. And when, no dates, nothing like that. So when I challenged them, I was told that they use generic messages to ensure we comply with the CPA notifications that are up for renewal, and that when you upgrade, they give you the details. But the point is, what about people who aren't upgrading, that are rolling over, that are going to get caught by a surprise hike? And the Act is very specific. It says that the service provider, in this case the cell phone networks, must, well before the contracts end, notify people of any material changes should they choose not to cancel or commit to a new contract. So they really are playing a bit fast and loose with that requirement. And what I want to do is is warn people that that this can happen, and to be if you don't want to have that huge increase, act accordingly. But if if what happened to Feroza happened to you and you didn't get that notice, specifically data contracts, because they said they should have emailed her, but they only sent her an SMS. If it's happened to you, you are in line for a discount. A refund, just as Feroza was. So go and do those checks.
I wonder sometimes also now, as I get older, life hacks, they call it. When you sign any kind of contract, and I've never done this, but it would make sense. If you're signing a cell phone contract for 2 years, actually put in your diary, your electronic diary, which, survives 2 years from now, that actually, the month before, this is what is going to happen, and therefore you need to take action. And that should maybe get you around some of this trouble.
Yes, very, very good advice. And as is, that you put it in the month before, because if you want to cancel, you have to give them that 30-day notice. Otherwise, you end up paying for another month that you really would prefer not to have.
Wendy Knowler, thank you so much, our consumer ninja. And I'm sure that you might well have had similar experiences. If you have, be good to hear from you about that. Wendy Knowler, thanks very much.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Well, I don't know if you've ever noticed, whenever you have a conversation around farming, around agriculture, the people who are involved speak with such passion. In a way, maybe they're a little different from, I'll get into trouble for this, from bankers. They have such passion for what they're doing, their involvement in their community. And imagine representing people who are so passionate about what they do. Well, Johan Kotze does just that. He's the CEO of Agri SN. He represents the agricultural industry. And I think we probably see him really as the voice of farmers. It's a great pleasure to welcome him this evening. Johan, good evening, and thanks so much for agreeing to spend some time on The Money Show tonight.
Yeah, what a pleasure, Stephen. Thank you so much.
I have to start by asking if you came from a farming tradition, and I hope I don't get you into trouble by asking the question.
No. Listen, truly on farming. My great-grandfather was an Italian out of Italy, and he was, I think, the large farmer for us. And then on my mom's side, they grew up in Zambia. So they went to go and farm in Zambia, and my father was also a farmer. So truly a farming community, a typical Afrikaans-speaking Boere farming community.
So were you growing up on a farm yourself?
Yes, I did. And I also farmed myself for 7 years.
Okay. I started by talking about the passion that people have for farming. It seems to me to be something quite different to everything else, and I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if you have a kind of rational explanation for something that I think is really not about rationality. It's about love and passion.
Yeah, I think it starts in the community. If I can recall my own life, you grow up in a farming community, not knowing anything else than farming, and you live yourself into this dream of being a farmer one day. So I think it's something that is stimulated by being involved in farming from a very young age. And also I think it's like-minded people being together in a community and just installing it into a little kit and into people. So that's the one thing. The other thing is I think that the love for nature and the love for what we do is not known. If I recall when I travel overseas and I meet a lot of farmers, it's different in South Africa. I think the passion we have, I think we are conservationists. We love nature. It's something that's so deeply embedded in us and I think that's where that passion comes from.
I often think, and in fact my children have asked me, how is it possible for someone to be a doctor that looks after ill children? And I always say to them, well, you must see children in the most awful way, but you must also watch them walk out of the hospital because you've cured them. As a farmer, you must watch crops grow, animals grow from nothing to mighty stalks of maize or, very valuable beef and things like that. There must be something very rewarding in that.
Stephen, I could recall as a kid that my father would take me when they started after the first rains to plow, to walk behind the plow and look at the little birds, the eggets coming in. And looking for little worms. I could remember him putting his hands into the soil, and then literally he would touch the soil and he would bring it to me and say, "Can you smell it?" So that reward is, and I think it never goes away. If I, not farming now, if I travel, and I see a little lamb, or I see, say, for instance, goats, and little goats just hopping around, I will stop and have a look and enjoy the moment thereof. That reward is so deeply embedded with us. I think another thing is the enjoyment we have for nature. So even if I'm in the city and it starts to rain and I can smell the rain, it brings so much memories and so much joy back to us. And I think that's the reward that we live with if we are farmers.
You did spend quite a lot of your career in banks, and I mean, you were at ABSA, you were at FirstRand in Mozambique, and you were in Mozambique at a very interesting time. That economy was beginning to grow, it was opening up. Our country was now changing quite quickly. What was that like? I mean, I presume you were kind of helping to finance that expansion.
Yeah, well, listen, they lured me in to be a corporate banker, just to realize that corporate banking in Mozambique is a bit different than South Africa. It was just the start of, I would say, the new phase of Mozambique. Mozambique today is totally different than what we had. I always refer back to the gratitude I have for ABSA, that they did send me to Africa, and I had the opportunity to go to Africa. If I look back in my career, it was one of the best times for us as a family. It was one of the best times for me as an individual in banking. I've learned so much, and it's humble people, it's people with a different mindset, it's people with a different outlook in life, which enriched my life a lot. And then I think what humbled me the most is what they made of what they had, and they literally had nothing. And how they create something out of something that is so small, and in South Africa it would be insignificant. And I've learned that you work with what you have and you turn it into gold. And that's what the Mozambicans told me. So my life and my heart, the Mozambican experience we had as a family living there was absolutely one of the most amazing experiences in my life.
Were you doing a lot of sort of agricultural deals, I'm presuming, there? I mean, that's one of the things that Mozambique really has to offer. I think most of the bananas I've eaten in the last 5 years come from there.
Yeah, listen, we did a lot of deals in Mozambique. A lot of South African farmers popped over the border from Komati side and started to farm in Mozambique. And we funded whatever we could. I could remember I even did crocodiles. And the guy who approached me to fund the crocodile project, he came and he lost his one arm. And before I could even ask, he looked at me and said, no, don't stress. It wasn't a crocodile. I lost it in an accident, so don't go there. So we literally funded whatever we could. Fish was a big one. Bananas, big. It's a big business, and it's a bicycle business where they sell two 30-ton trucks of bananas every day on bicycles. I think one of the largest egg farms I've seen, including South Africa, was in Mozambique. Broilers, also a big business. So Mozambique is not that big in agriculture as South Africa, but big businesses in Mozambique doing agriculture. Sugarcane is also a big one, refined sugar. So it was also one of our bigger clients in Mozambique.
I'm presuming that one of the reasons you did it, and one of the reasons you were asked to do it, was your farming background, right? This kind of banking is, I'm presuming, different to your Santon merger and acquisition.
It was to develop farming. I think at that stage, ABSA was still a novice in doing business in Africa. So farming was for us a big focus. And I think the reason why I got the job was because of my farming background, and what we did with farming, especially in agro-processing. Maybe just if I may, a concept about Mozambique. A lot of people ask me, why did I go to Mozambique? Because it was a very poor country. I think it was the 5th poorest on earth at that stage. And why would you go with your family to Mozambique? Now, the reality was that a lot of my counterparts went overseas to Australia and New Zealand, and we just felt we want to stay in Africa. We want to stay in South Africa, and what I did realize is that I don't understand Africa. Although we South Africans, we do not have that much knowledge about Africa. So I choose Africa. I choose to go to Africa, and I'm grateful for the opportunity because the Africans taught me, I think, some valuable lessons, which it's only the Africans having those lessons. And so what an experience in having an African mindset, which we sometimes overlook, and we don't give the credit to Africa for their mindset with what they have and what they create is absolutely beautiful. So a total turnaround in my own concept as an individual to understand Africa better. And my take was, if I want to be creative in South Africa and contribute to the South African community, which I loved, I need to understand also the African concept, and today it's working. Today it's helping me a lot.
It's so interesting that because I mean you're right. A lot of people who had the opportunity went to other places, but I think a lot of people who went into Africa from South Africa seem to have maybe had a much happier experience in many different ways. You did then go, and if I understand your career trajectory, you went from sort of banking to the Pork Producers Association. So you went from money in agriculture to representing an industry. And it's a whole new set of skills. And I wondered how big a change that was. I mean, sure, it's still farming, it's still your passion, but it's a different kind of thing, and maybe some political skills along the way.
Yeah, maybe you missed 7 years before that. I went from corporate to work for myself. And I always say, referred back to it. It was one of the most expensive experiences in my life, where I created the most wealth. I came to a point where corporate it felt like I was swallowed in by corporate. We literally started at 4 o'clock in the morning and we ended at 8. And I made a U-turn, and I resigned, and I went with my 3 daughters, and we went to go and live in Nature's Valley in the Western Cape, and a small little place. And I just said to myself, I need to find life in a different way. And what a beautiful time, because the investment in my family was a big, I would say, it's an asset today. And I think that's what Africa taught me, that how valuable community and specifically family is, and the impact on your own life in carrying you in difficult times. Going from banking into representing the pork industry, I would say was one of the greatest leaps I had. I could remember when they phoned me, I said the following. Now I say it was arrogant in my thinking. I said, never in my life. I work with farmers, but to work for a farmer, it's one of the most difficult jobs because they are so diverse in their thinking. And the next thing is pork. Yeah, in my life, pigs, never, man. There's no chance I would be able to do it. And then also thinking back into it, I was the CEO then, and I started as the CEO. What a colorful experience. It is a humble industry, not talking that much, but what a fantastic industry. Technologically, they're in the forerunners in South Africa in industry-wise. If you have a look in the world, they are world leaders in biosecurity. And if I say that's not what I'm saying, it's what the world is saying. So what a fantastic experience. I think what many people are missing is that, and I think that's what made me good while being with them, I never tend to be a politician. I never tend to take the political road. I always took the corporate road and doing business. So we spoke about it yesterday. One of the guys in industry, and I said one of the things that we lack in industry is we can't make a decision. Because we politically want to be correct. Sometimes you need to make a call and you need to stand for the call that you made. And I think what corporate taught me is to stand for those calls. And the pig industry allowed me to be there. So what a wonderful experience with the pig industry.
We're speaking to Johan Kotze tonight. He's your shapeshifter, the CEO at Agri SA.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Johan Kotzer, the CEO at Agri-SA, is your shapeshifter this evening. Johan, I do need to ask you a question or two about your current job, right? And I've often wondered about managing the politics of farming, because I think for a lot of people who are not farmers, there are probably two things that they think about when it comes to this. The one is food prices, and the other is questions and arguments around land. And land in South Africa, as you know better than I, historically is the cause of a lot of pain, or what happened really is the cause of a lot of pain. You must have moments when people are really very angry, very emotional, and with good reason. How do you deal with those moments?
Yeah, we do. I must be honest, I think sometimes it's a bit lonely, and it comes and goes. So it's not that it's every day, but then you get into a season where there's a lot of focus specifically on land, which is very emotional in South Africa. I think the way to deal with it, my way with dealing with it is I wake up quite early in the morning, and I really put myself into a different space where I just think through it. And you always come back to a point where you say it's not about you. So I believe sometimes we are very self-centered when we deal with this, when people are attacking you as a person. And I think my way of getting out of it is to not be self-centered and to focus on what needs to happen in South Africa and to have a clear mind regarding this. And if I may, that if I take it personal, I normally go back and I think the one weapon that I have is forgiveness. And even if I'm in the wrong or somebody else is in the wrong, it's just to say, God, forgive them, and I forgive them. And it helped me a lot as an individual because it is tough. And then you get to the point where you work and you can work through somebody else's mind and kind of understand their minds and the way they think. And kind of put yourself into their stance. And I think out of that, a lot of clarity comes with that, and a lot of wisdom to just how to deal with the situation.
I sometimes, I look at this, and as I think you might know, I followed this as a sort of political reporter and with what I do now. And one of the things I find really difficult, especially at the moment, is that so many people say things that are not true. And they're saying that they're doing that deliberately. I mean, that must be infuriating for you.
Stephen, I went to America, and what an eye-opener. And the first night, I felt like battered, and I felt like somebody in a boxing game, and they just got me out, and I was bruised. And I sat down and I went through my mind through this whole concept. But what happened this day? And what came to mind is people spoke about agriculture out of a fear and out of what possibly might go wrong. But they did not testify of who we are. And what came to mind is that I can't change the world itself. And I think social media is good, but also evil in this sense. But what I can do is I can testify about the goodness of what I experienced through the farmers that we have in agriculture. And what started to happen is that testimony is so true that overpowers the lie. And I think what we tend to do with agriculture, specifically in Agri-SA, is to talk about the testimonies of farmers. And sometimes it's tough, it's hard, but you kind of push back into that space. The difficult one is that we need to be the voice of reason. And that voice of reason is not a strong voice being radical and to the left or to the right, but it's always middle ground. And so you can't participate and you can't push back in social media when you have these harsh discussions. And that's sometimes tough. But we've learned that the testimony of a farmer, there's no greater voice. And there's no stronger voice regarding certain situations that we are in. And we just need to advocate that a bit more.
Johan, we've got 30 seconds left, I'm afraid. But everyone talks about how the world is changing. And every time I hear the phrase AI and artificial intelligence, I want to scream. Is it changing as quickly in farming as it seems to be changing in other places?
It does. It does. We utilize it a lot. I think precision farming is a big play for us. We have world-class farmers participating on world-class platforms. And AI does play a major role into this. I think quality-wise, productivity is jacked up by AI. So there's a lot of offtake on AI. Still a lot to do, still a far way to go. But as South African farmers, we're well geared and well, I would say, well equipped with AI. And we do understand the concept of, and we utilize it.
Johan Kotze, thank you very much indeed. I really do appreciate the time, and I appreciate the wisdom that you've shared with us as well tonight. Johan Kotze, the CEO at AgriSA, your shapeshifter on The Money Show.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, American market headlines tonight still about NVIDIA, their $4 trillion valuation as their stocks have risen today. And markets still shrugging off all of the tariff talk. The Dow Jones is up 1/4, the NASDAQ up 2/3%, the S&P 500 up 1/3%. We, of course, will be back with you tomorrow. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.